ahead.
Well, I didn't.
Now!
And I'll bet your mother had a loud bark.
Good morning. This is Morning Coffee with the Chief. I'm your host, Patrick Jordan, retired law enforcement officer. And on this show, we go over movies involving crime and law enforcement officers. We talk about the movie, give our impressions based upon our own careers, and talk about how they reflect on society today. Today we have a great movie. It's L.A. Confidential, an Oscar award-winning movie, and it's one that I really liked and I've been looking forward to do. But I was trying to find the right host, and hopefully we can get our host who's struggling with some technology stuff, or our guest who's struggling with some technology stuff on, because he's got some great background information about what was going on in the 40s, 50s, and 60s with LA PD. But before I get into that stuff, I want to talk about one of my favorite subjects, and that's the LA Mission. They do fantastic work for the homeless in downtown Los Angeles. Skid Row is probably has the highest concentration of homeless in any urban environment. In fact, new stats came out, and the homeless population increased by nearly 10% in the city and county of Los Angeles, despite the hundreds of millions, upwards of billions of dollars spent by government to help the homeless. But there are some great nonprofits that are doing fantastic work and have been doing great work for a long time, who are not misguided by ideological politics and focus on what actually works. And the LA Mission is one of them. The LA Mission provides wraparound services for those who are ready to get off the streets, inclusive of cognitive behavioral therapies, which is the gold standard to help people to change their lifestyle. They also provide basic services for, the homeless who aren't ready to get off the street but still need a meal, maybe a cot and a place to take a shower, get some socks and underwear. So please look up the Los Angeles Mission at lamission.org and make a small donation. Any amount helps, $25, $50, $100. You will help some people in need, hopefully encourage them to get off the streets and reintegrate back into society. So let's get back. First of all, I really want to talk about the intro. I want to thank Gary for providing an info just for me. If you just saw that intro, it's fantastic. It's law enforcement related. It took him a while to get up. I've been up for a few months doing the show, and I finally got my intro. Please make some comments, whether you like it or not. Additionally, you can find us on Pop Culture Minefield on YouTube. All of my shows are there. And you can also find us on Pop Culture Minefield Rumble channel. If you're not an aficionado of YouTube, you can go to Rumble. Our relationship with KJRJ has changed, but they still post the show on their Facebook page. So you go to Facebook, KGRA, and watch my shows there as well. And I encourage you to do that. I'm also working on getting up on the platform, the Instagram platform, but I'm an old, so I'm learning the technology. You can find me on Twitter at LASDJordan, and I comment not only on the shows, but a variety of issues of the day. And so let's bring on some of my guests, because I'd like to get in a little bit of pre-discussion about what's going on today with my guest. My first guest is Lieutenant John Bayless, retired Lieutenant John Bayless. That is, John and I have a long relationship. We worked for a long time together in transit policing for the LA County Sheriff. He has 30 plus years in law enforcement. He's got a couple master's degrees, so he's not just a pretty face. He's a smart guy too. And I love John because he speaks what he thinks. He just lets it out there. He's not shy at giving opinion. And we have too many people in law enforcement who are afraid of stating their opinions because Well, they get targeted, and so that's why I bring on retired dudes because they can say whatever they want. They got their pension rolling in, and they're so. Anyways, John, good morning, John. How you doing?
Morning. Oh, doing great.
How's everything in Nevada? Right, that's where you're at.
Yeah. I just had my oldest and his wife and my first two granddaughters over for the weekend. It was great. Had a blast.
As some would say, you're a California refugee now, hiding in Nevada to get away from the taxes in California and all of the leftist politics that seem to be prevalent. You guys are actually going red. Nevada's kind of going red, which is kind of interesting. It's always been kind of a purple state, but
Yeah.
Thank you for coming back on the show. I appreciate you being a guest.
Anytime.
So, Martin, are we ready to bring in my next guest? Have we solved our technical problems?
I hope so.
Oh, there you are, Buzz. How are you?
Oh. I'm doing good.
Let me introduce you a little bit. So Buzz is a retired Long Beach police sergeant. Did 30 plus years at Long Beach. He is a friend of John's. He has a blog, Buzz's blog. I think it's the Prescott E-News. Let's put that link up there if we can, Martin, so they can see it. I read one of your articles, Buzz. Definitely right at the center. Which I like. I personally think there's a lot of cops who are right there in the middle politically, both, and a lot of us. I try to refer to myself as pragmatic conservative, right? And I think most of us are after 30 plus years in law enforcement, right? So,
Yep.
Ideology is the bad thing to embrace. You're trying to actually solve a problem because it limits your options, right? Blog. He's also written a couple of books. So let's see if we can get some titles up there, Martin. Were you able to get let's see. And
there's his dilemma on there.
There we go. There's Dilemma. And I think one was jokes about law enforcement. Buzz, why don't you explain your books briefly?
Okay, the first book I wrote was Police Pranks, Jokes, and Other Stories Not Suitable for Children. People have asked me, why aren't they suitable for children? Well, I worked 3 years of Vice, and it's pretty hard to talk about Vice and children at the same in the same book. So, and I have a whole family. My whole family was in police work. Both my grandfathers were on LAPD. My dad was on LAPD. Had a great uncle, a cousin on LAPD, and an uncle who retired as a sergeant from Hawthorne PD. I wanted to be a bank robber, but I didn't think I could live past my first family reunion. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we're
He's going in
struggling.
now.
Every time
it's
you move
coming
your
and
face,
going.
every time you move your face sideways, we lose you. If you talk straight on, it seems
Okay,
like
well,
it's okay. No.
Is this all right?
So far.
Yeah,
Is this
so
all
far.
right? Okay.
That's good, right there.
Yeah. And then my second book was a novel I wrote about a serial rapist murder dilemma. But yeah, I had a good time writing them, and I've got a couple other books that I'm starting to write right now. One's almost about 2/3 finished.
So one of the reasons why I was excited to have you on the show, and hopefully we can some of these technical things will work themselves out. John, okay.
Sorry, my puppy got in some grease.
Okay. So is that in history? I come from family law enforcement too, and my dad started working for Detroit Police in the late 50s, right, and did 37 years. And of course, he has his own stories. But it was interesting because I wanted to do LA Confidential, and I wanted to contrast the corruption, what was going on back in the 50s to what's going on today, right? And your grandfather, one of your grandfathers, I guess, was on the original Gang Squad or Gangster Squad or Hat Squad. It's got so many.
Hat Squad.
What? First of all, everybody, as you told me before when we talked, everybody wore a hat. So to say it was a hat back then, and as I remember correctly, you told me that they started this Gangster Squad, if that's the real name, right after World War II. Is that accurate?
That's correct. 1945. They sent out a lieutenant to all the substations, and the lieutenant went in with a Tommy gun and said, "Hey, we're starting squad, and we're going to get all the gangsters that are coming in from other areas to take over our city, and we're going to stop them. And that's how they started the Gangster Squad. They recruited from patrol mostly, but some detectives too.
Yeah, so let me recap because we are still having some technical difficulties. So they started the squad after World War II, and it was really just to get rid of the gangsters who were coming to town. And I guess the way to say it is LA was more of a wide open town, meaning no particular gang from around the country had influence, and they were all coming here to try and make some hay. I mean, we did have, and they get into it. We had Mickey Cohen here, and I think he was Frank Dragna was the name of the guy. So that we had gangsters here, but it was in comparison to the East Coast, they were probably weak, and compared to the Midwest, they were kind of weak. And so we had these other gangsters coming out here to make hay and make money. And then your grandfather started, but also your dad ended up on the team after your grandfather retired. Is that accurate?
Yes, my grandfather.
Boss,
Yeah,
you're
we're
not
gonna have
coming
to.
through.
Can you take it backstage and work on it, Martin? See what you can do.
No, there's nothing I can do at this end.
Okay. All right, Buzz. We're gonna have to, drop. Go ahead and we're gonna have to if we can't get you up on the cell phone because you're just cutting in and out too much for us to make this work. Go ahead and log completely out of the computer and come up only on your cell phone with the link. I sent you the link via text.
Yeah, send it again because it's not coming up. But send it again.
Okay.
I'll log off here.
All right.
Okay.
So, John, one of the things I did want to talk about today before we get into our movie is, in the last 15 council districts, or there's 15 LA City council districts, right? In the last 5 years, 5 of those districts, the councilman has been indicted.
Right.
I mean, that's what's going on today. And so we look back at what was going on in the 40s, and this show is essentially about LAPD being corrupt and the whole city government actually being corrupt is what it's about.
Absolutely.
And but we just had an indictment of Curran Price. He's the councilman for District 9. He put his girlfriend on the payroll before to give her medical benefits, and then now some developer is working with her to get influence through the process. I think there's a whole bunch of things regarding that I have a problem with, but it really, corruption has not gone away in
Nope.
LA, and no matter what you think of the LAPD, Chief Parker and the successive chiefs after Parker have worked really hard to keep the LAPD clean. Now we had Rampart, but Rampart, was a mile wide, an inch deep. It just wasn't the level of corruption that we saw back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s in or 50s. Probably, I think the 60s it started transitioning out in Los Angeles, and it certainly isn't the level of corruption that we're seeing with our politicians. And you could add to that what's going on with the Biden family. What do you think of that?
Well, the Biden family is just that whole family is a joke, nothing but criminals. But of course, the weaponization of the FBI and the DEA and everything else, you're not going to see anything for quite a while. Look at Hunter. He pled to 2 misdemeanor charges of fraud and got no time, just probation. And there's still other stuff out there that they haven't charged him with, and who knows if they ever will. In fact, James Comey was on a reel yesterday talking about how ridiculous and how the DOJ is doing a great job and how the politicians are corrupt. Yeah, he ought to look in the mirror because he's the most corrupt guy I've seen. But, I did some background on that movie and also on, in Hollywood, they do a lot of, they put a lot of different things together that don't match, but
right.
It makes for a better story. Florida State University did a case study in 1950 on LAPD corruption, and it dated all the way back to 1918. 1918 to 1923, 8 police chiefs and 4 mayors were kicked out for corruption. That was in the 18th to the 23. And since then, it's even been worse. But in the movie, Parker, he was by the way, that TV show that Vincennes, Kevin Spacey was on?
Yeah.
Dragnet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Parker was the advisor on that show, technical advisor.
Oh, he was. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And he actually, looking at what I read, he's the one who came up with the slogan, the thin blue line.
Oh, really?
Yep. And then both things that they mixed in the movie, they had the Bloody Christmas where they beat all the Hispanics that took to jail. That was 1951.
Yeah. So it was, I did that too. That was a little earlier. So, so we still have corruption but the corruption is, for the most part, in my opinion, I mean, it's the political class is demonstrating a lack of integrity and are greatly more corrupt than anybody else. I mean, certainly law enforcement has its issues. I mean, we had that one deputy who tried to rip off the marijuana dispensary a few years ago, and he just got 20 years in federal prison. So it does happen, but the audacity, I mean, if you look at what Jose Huizar, city councilman, he was looking to get $1 million to get a high-rise approved in the city of LA. So, and it's funny, somebody close to me said, they make a very complicated permitting process to get anything built, which really inspires people to bribe politicians so they can get it built.
Right.
Which, makes absolute sense to me, right? So
Right.
Buzz, let's do a sound check. How do you?
I can hear you guys fine. Can you hear me?
Oh, much better. So,
excellently.
Excellent.
Okay.
So let's, the thing about the Gangster Squad, well, they have a movie on it, and I'll bring Buzz back to do that movie as well down the road with James Brolin. But some of it was really about weeding corruption. And one of the ways you weed corruption out of law enforcement is get rid of the temptations. And the people who are doing the temptations are the gangsters, right? They're willing to bribe. As I did a show, it was a couple weeks ago, as Prince of the City, about corruption and NYPD. And there was a transition with New York where they went from very corrupt to maybe not as corrupt, and they still have their issues just like we do, but they're nowhere near where they were in the 1850s, 1860s, 1960s.
Right.
They have improved, but so has law enforcement, and so has LAPD. And with the current city council corruption in LA, the current corruption that appears to be going on at the federal level with the Bidens, I just want to demonstrate that law enforcement is much cleaner. And I think the politicians ought to be wearing body cams everywhere they go, so that we can weed out the corruptions. Any comments on current corruption going on, Buzz, before we get into our movie?
Well, no, basically, like you said, the biggest threat caused by corruption is through the politicians. I've written a couple of articles. In fact, when I was the editor of the Long Beach Police Officers Association rap sheet, I wrote an article about chiefs of police should be elected like sheriffs, because then they would have to answer to the people instead of to the politicians.
Absolutely.
Because the politicians are the ones that are causing a lot of the corruption. In fact, all the Antifa riots they had, I think, and I know in my city of Long Beach, they didn't do anything when they were tearing up Pine Avenue, and the chief of police was standing next to the mayor, and I'm sure the mayor told the chief of police, "Don't do anything. Let them have their way," and that's what happened.
I saw that in Santa Monica too, and then they used the chief as a scapegoat. It was crazy,
Yeah.
And I wasn't the biggest fan of our last sheriff. I liked a lot of stuff he did. I didn't like some of the stuff he did, and but he stood up to the writers. If they looted somewhere, he showed up, and if the city wanted help, like Beverly Hills, but no, come on, help, and they took care of business in Beverly Hills.
Yeah.
They had about 3 hours of getting looted before they managed to get control, where Santa Monica went on for a day or two, just because they didn't have the courage to use the force that law enforcement is justified for using. So one of the reasons why I wanted to do the show is the recent indictment of Current Price, who's a city councilman in the city of Los Angeles. I wanted to acknowledge that LA has had corruption in the past, which, as Johnny B
Sure.
kind of laid out with the study, it does exist. But the LAPD, the LA County Sheriff's Department, and most law enforcement is relative clean of what we would call corruption, and that's graft, where you're getting money in exchange for favors, right? And that stuff has been pretty much cleaned up in Los Angeles, although they expand the word of corruption to be just anything that a police officer does wrong because it fits their narrative. But it is the political class that's having a problem. So when your grandpa and your father were on the Gangster Squad, it was to eliminate the people that would attempt to buy politicians and police officers to do their criminal activities. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate. As you probably know, most police corruption, especially back then, came from the Vice Squad. Back then, Vice and narcotics were just one unit, Vice, and that's where the temptations were. A lot of people considered gambling and prostitution victimless crimes, and a lot of the police officers did too. So they would take bribes to look the other way. I mean, what was it in late 40s? Brenda Allen was a madam in L.A. and she had a bagman who was a sergeant in the administrative vice in L.A.
Yeah.
And they got caught and both, I think, did prison time. But yeah, it comes in through vice and narcotics. That's where the main danger is for corruption and police work.
Right. So, hey, let's get into our movie here. Let me introduce the movie. So, L.A. Confidential was released in 1997. It's a neo-noir crime film. It was nominated for multiple Academy Awards and won for Best Supporting Actress, and I think Best Screenplay. It stars Guy Pearce, who plays Exley, and then Russell Crowe, who plays the great guy Bud White, who's kind of the Polish. He just reminds me of the old big Polish guys from Detroit, and then I mean, it just big and thick, and taking no prisoners. And then you got Kevin Spacey, which I mean, he's had his issues these days, but I really liked his character in this movie. And then Kim Basinger, absolutely beautiful in this movie, and she won an Academy Award for the movie. She was fantastic. And then Danny DeVito, I like Danny DeVito, and everything. Whenever I saw his hush hush and his whole rag thing, all I could think of is that's the early version of TMZ, right? TMZ, it's the same junk, right? So a great movie, and filmed all over, and I recognized some of the Formosa Cafe, which was kind of cool. And did you like the movie, John?
Oh, I loved it. I've seen it a couple times, and I watched it again last week for notes. That Formosa Cafe started in '39, and it was in our area in West Hollywood. Yeah. You remember that? Just real quick, the corruption isn't just in LA City or LA County right now. When we were working, the city of Carson, which was one of our cities that we serviced, they were getting kickbacks on trash. I mean, it was just like New York,
Yes.
But like that old saying, power breeds corruption, ultimate power breeds ultimate corruption. And look at what happens now. You were talking about police chiefs versus sheriffs. Well, because he was, I'm not the biggest fan of our last sheriff, but he did some great stuff, and he was doing some corruption investigations. And guess what? The county supervisors voted to now make it a at-will position that assigned, not voted on by the people, which I think is blatantly illegal.
So I did get a comment. They liked the Black Dahlia case, and I did talk to Bud. We're going to do the Black Dahlia case down the road. The person this movie is based upon a book by James Elroy, and he wrote, I think, a book about the Black Dahlia. So now that I know Buzz and I have the contact, so John, thank you for the contact. I will be using Buzz for some of these older stuff because he's got the historical knowledge and the fact that his grandfathers, and his dad were on the LAPD, and we're at least peripherally related to these cases. And he's done his own research regarding these cases, so he's a great source. So Martin, let's do the opening scene. I really want to talk about the opening scene because it really kind of sets the stage for what is going on in Los Angeles at the time. And if you guys remember the opening scene, which normally I don't talk about the opening scene, but it's Danny DeVito talking about what's going on in L.A. and it's kind of his hush hush thing. But we're coming out of World War II. We got all these baby boomers who just went through a horrific, war, who just want to settle down, have kids, get their house, and work hard and move forward with their life. And so it created this huge boom in LA. And then, of course, LA also had the reputation coming out of the Great Depression in the 40s, 50s for Hollywood as well. And that was a big deal. And he talks about all that stuff. And I can remember when I first got here. I got here in '81, driving up to the old jail I worked at. We still had onion fields around. We still had some orange groves, not many, but he was right. There was a lot of farmland that was now being taken over by housing. There was a big explosion in housing and opportunity in LA, right? So I mean, it kind of sets it up pretty good, don't you think, Buzz?
Oh yeah, you did a perfect job in describing the what was going on in that era with all the returning soldiers and sailors and yeah, just those big housing booms then because a lot of these military men had come from the Midwest and the East and saw the good weather in California and wanted to move here.
Yeah. We just got a comment. Yes, Kim Basinger and Danny DeVito were in two of the Batman stars. So yes, they are reunited here. But yeah, I tell you, I came here from the Midwest because I wanted the weather, or when I came here, I wanted a job, and then I felt the weather, and I said, "Well, I'm not going back. I'm staying here."
Yeah.
It's what keeps people coming to California, even though the politics at times are bad. Hey, Mark, we got to catch up. So let's go ahead and go into our next scene, and this is LAPD in Hollywood. Right after this one, just go roll right in there because I want to talk about the intersection of LAPD in Hollywood, and I'm sure that I'll do more movies with LAPD in Hollywood. But we had, Adam 12, we had Dragnet. Now I had a new intro, and Dragnet's part of my new intro, right, for the show. And these started setting the tone for what LAPD actually should be: clean, just the facts, ma'am, and kind of wholesome law enforcement. But it is the growth of Hollywood and the perception of what LAPD is, at least in those first years, probably the 40s, 50s, and 60s. There's a positive impression of law enforcement kind of coming out of Hollywood. And there is a relationship between LAPD and Hollywood. What do you think, Buzz?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, the mob, from the movie The Godfather, you could see that the mob was trying to get into Hollywood, and they actually did get into Hollywood, and in a lot of the unions, film unions, the cameramen and everything else, they made inroads in there and were able to make some of the big studios work their way. If they didn't want something, they just call a strike, and in order to get all the workers back on the movie set, they'd have to concede stuff to the mob.
Yeah, I read a book a long time ago. It was about Jimmy the Weasel Frantino. I can't remember exactly. Fradiano, yeah, and he had corrupted Hollywood out here. It was probably 60s, 70s, and into the 80s. He ended up being a government informant. But yeah, they worked hard to get into Hollywood, and but LAPD also, has its inroads with Hollywood in that they end up being technical advisors. They end up profiling LAPD with Dragnet and all these shows that we watched as kids, and really shaped our perception of what law enforcement should be. What do you think, John?
Oh, I agree with that synopsis. But Hollywood and the police and cover-ups go all the way back to Fatty Arbuckle.
Oh yeah.
And when Superman was murdered in his bedroom, George Reeves.
Yeah.
a lot of stuff has been covered up many a time. And it was, I don't know if it was just political heavy-handedness or just LAPD was doing it on their own, but a lot of cover-ups.
You know, one of the other things is Danny DeVito's character on Hush Hush and TMV. Who's the head of TMZ now? Levine, I think his name is.
Yeah.
And you know, and I couldn't help but when I watched the movie, and I was enthralled by the whole Johnny Depp. What's the gal that he married? That and where they got divorced.
Amber Heard.
Amber Heard, yes.
Yeah.
I watched a lot of that testimony just because it's like, okay, well, what's the truth here, you know? And when you watch her, you realize, of course, she's lying through her teeth. But the interesting thing, there was a point in the trial where somehow TMZ, hush hush, TMZ gets a call, and they show up at the courthouse where she's filing her divorce papers, and she allegedly has a bruise. Now, whatever you think about that, it's like, okay, unfortunately, I've had to go through a divorce, but I never had to go to court. You just send the paperwork there. There's no reason to be in court to file any paperwork, no reason to do any of that stuff, yet she's there, and TMZ gets a call. I personally think, as I watched the trial, that was the coup de grace on anything she said, because it was clearly fabricated, and it's the behavior that she engaged in that probably goes on for a long time, that you see with LA Confidential and Hush Hush. And another good example is Weinstein. You know, that guy, the Me Too guy, who was he was using the media.
Harvey Weinstein.
He was using the media to put out bad, negative articles about women that he had abused. So what you're seeing with Hush Hush and is something that seems to be common practice in the media and or in Hollywood, and the media has such a desire to have inroads into Hollywood that they're willing to forsake their ethical obligations, particularly with Weinstein. The fact that they were doing these hit pieces on these women that he raped was unbelievable. I just can't.
Yeah. How
could you do that? But that stuff existed then, and it exists now, right? So I mean, that's what I saw. John, do you agree with that?
Absolutely. You know, Louis B. Mayer and several of those other heads had direct lines to the police chief, and they just call him and say, "Hey, we got this issue. Can you help us out?" And it wasn't that way, but they did it. In fact, it still went on when we were working. When I was at West Hollywood, and I was the op sergeant one day, and we arrested one of Kirk Douglas's sons, who's no longer with us, the son also. And I'm just starting to read the report. 5 seconds in, I get a call from Sherman Block.
Yeah.
Tell me about this. What's going on? And because Kirk called him directly.
Well, and we have to understand.
You know, when I told him what happened, Block told him, "Hey, sorry, boom, 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 1, 2, 3. This is what your son did." You know, okay, thank you.
Yeah, and Sherman Block was a straight guy, and he would have let's see, so he did 16 years as the sheriff, and so it would have been 92. He probably came in not long after World War II,
right,
onto the sheriff's department. So he would have been familiar with a lot of the behaviors and stuff that we're talking about, and he's probably our version of probably Parker, right? Now, I'm sure we had a few. But he was a straight, clean guy, and he pushed his department in a direction where we avoided corruption, and he was a very skilled politician. But I can imagine he still had to do the perfunctory things: take the phone call from the studio head and call to find out what's going on, and then give him
exactly.
Make sure nobody's pulling any fast ones, which we weren't, and then support his guys when he finds out that we're clean, right? So, so that's so there is an intersection between, and it's, there's a few times you see LA County sheriffs working with, and even Long Beach guys working with Hollywood, but it is the LAPD connection with Hollywood is strong. It's I mean, I don't know if your grandfather, your father ever talked about that stuff, Buzz, but it's been going on for a long time, right? And they're the primary, because they're right there in Hollywood, right?
Yeah, my dad talked about it quite a bit, because they were trying to take over the film industry. The mob was, and even after my dad retired, he was a private investigator, and he was hired by one of the studios that was filming one of their TV shows where every week they wrecked all kinds of cars. and the head of the studio says, I want to find out. I think they're taking these cars and reusing us and reusing them every day and fixing them up after a crash and then using them the next day and charging us for a new car every day. And they were doing that. And my dad traced it to one of their prop guys, and then to the guy above him, and then to the guy above him, and all the way back to the head of the studio. And all of a sudden they said, okay, thank you for your service. Here's the rest of your money. And that was the end of the investigation.
Yeah, there's always been some comments because I worked near Universal Studios for a long time, and there's comments about the accounting of movies. What is really
Yeah.
the
Oh
true
God.
cost, right? Yeah. Did they really make money? I mean, it's interesting that they have wacky math, I think, going on, or voodoo math when they're counting what does a movie truly cost. But we're talking about there's no doubt in my mind that that is organized crime. Actually, it just may not be organized crime with the mafia. But it is organized crime when you have that many people working on it. So, but LAPD and Hollywood are linked, and they're going to be linked forever because Hollywood is based in Los Angeles, and of course,
Right.
LAPD is the primary law enforcement agency. And that's just a fact. That's always going to happen. We still see it today. Southland, I think, is an LAPD-based show, right? And I think it isn't Bosch an LAPD
Sure.
series. So
Yep.
yeah. So I mean, that's just the way it's going to go. It's either going to be New York or Los Angeles, sometimes Chicago, and unfortunately, those of us who worked for the sheriff's department, we just get these peripheral roles every now and then, or Long Beach, right? We don't.
Yeah, a lot less than the sheriffs too. So
yeah. Even though we're bigger than LAPD, but hey, whatever, So that's okay. So hey, let's bring up the next scene. And this scene, Martin, is Bloody Christmas. I kind of wanted to talk about this. So Bloody Christmas, as John mentioned, is actually a true story. And what you notice about there is truth or facts have influenced this movie, right?
Do you want to show the?
Oh, wait a minute. Did we already show LAPD in Hollywood? Oh yeah, let's show this. So here is an article. So Bloody Christmas is actually a true story. This is an article, I believe it's from the LA Times at the time, where they indicted 36 LA policemen for discipline regarding this situation that occurred. And it was LAPD who beat up some folks that had apparently assaulted some police officers. And the thing about this is they were drinking at the station. It got out of hand at a Christmas party, and these guys went down and beat these guys. So this is a case where real life did influence the movies, and it came out in the movies. Now, it happened a couple of years before, but it helps to set the tone as to what was going on at Hollywood at the time. What do you think, or in LAPD and Hollywood at the time? What do you think, Buzz?
Well, yeah, it wasn't an incident. And what happened, just like you said, they were drunk. They went down and beat these two guys who thumped some police officers. The police officers weren't injured that bad, but they did have to go to the hospital. I think one guy got stitches, but 5 Mexicans and 2 white guys got beaten really bad, broken bones and ruptured organs. I think some cops were fired and suspended. I think 8 officers were later indicted, but only one served more than a year in prison. So
it is based upon a true story, but this is an example where, okay, so Parker, he's cleaning house, or whoever the chief was at the time, he's cleaning house, and he's holding these guys accountable. And this, of course, people would look at this today and go, oh my God, but this is before, Miranda. This is before Escobedo. This is before all these changes where we move forward from corrupt police, which was accepted. I mean, in one of the movies I did, Prince of the City, the main guy said, hey man, this is an environment you made. We're just the guys who are operating in it. But they're, obviously these things need to change. That's where these rulings from the Supreme Court. What do you think, John? We've come a far way from Bloody Christmas to where we're at today, right?
Oh, absolutely. Back then, of course, they didn't have the technology, but nowadays there's cameras everywhere. And this wouldn't happen in a regular jail, or if it has happened, they've been caught on tape. But no, it's 1951 was when that occurred. and it was righteous. The guy screwed up, and at least they did something about it, as opposed to just putting it all under the rug.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's real.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I noticed about this scene, and there was a height and height requirement back then. These guys are all big guys, and when I watched the show, I also said a lot of these guys probably fought in World War II too. So
Sure.
these guys are. That's just the way we you don't see too many small, skinny guys. I think Vincenz is the only one that's skinny there. That's a small guy, but that was true. We had height requirements, right? You had to be over 6 foot to be on the LAPD at the time. Is that accurate? Both your dad and grandparents were over 6 foot tall. Is that true, Buzz?
Well, I think my grandpa Williams was 5'11", but my grandpa Miller was 6 foot. My dad was 6'3". So yeah, they did have requirements, height requirements, weight requirements, and yeah, you didn't get on if you were wimpy at all.
Yeah, I think the other thing is the intersection of alcohol in this scene. It was a lot more prevalent when I first started in '81 for guys to go out for choir practice, I guess, and have a few beers. And the fact that they were drinking in the station, which seems to be pretty accurate with what actually happened, is that was more acceptable back then. And it was less acceptable when I joined, but having a beer right after work with a bunch of guys was a lot more acceptable than it is today. Right now,
Yeah.
what do you think, John?
Oh yeah, I remember a few stations I've worked where you get off duty, you go in the parking lot, and you're drinking off the tailgate of somebody's pickup truck in the sheriff's parking lot. But mainly, we went to cop bars.
Yeah, and I also saw how they just ran right over Exley here, the college boy. They just steamed right over him. He had no command presence to stop any of this, and
No. And all those guys were from World War II and Korea. They ain't going to take any shit from anybody that's wimpy.
Yeah. But they called it the Saturday Club, and I worked 3 and at 2-3 in the morning, and guys would go out with 6-packs in the parking lot between the police building courthouse and drink, and eventually they had a barbecue that they took out there. But yeah, it was common practice. And when I got on, it didn't happen to me, but a buddy of mine is working with a partner, and they're in the area of the Pike, and they go in, and his training officer says, got 2 cups of coffee. Well, they bring 2 coffee cups with bourbon in it, and he says, okay, drink it. And they would, start their shift with a cup of coffee, or what was called coffee.
Yeah.
Well, I can't say that it never happens anymore, but I can say that is not quite as prevalent as it was. Certainly towards the end of my career, we'd stopped a lot of that stuff. It just, alcohol doesn't mix, right? And it's best you should be going home instead of hanging with the guys and drinking a bunch of beer after work. That's the better way to go. But we are talking at the time, it was a different time where alcohol was much more acceptable, and drinking in relationship to work. Have you ever watched the series Mad Men, right? The actor Ham, and they got these full bars in their offices at the ad agencies in New York. I'm like, oh my God. Well, we did a little boxing, maybe a little bit of judo with the wrist locks and things like that. But now, man, everybody with this craze, this MMA craze, you never know who you're going to face on the streets. But Bud White is definitely a tough guy in this show. What do you think, John?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. No, I loved the movie, and Bud White was the guy. But again, he was in that. He was from World War II. He was in the Army. He knew all about life, and he wasn't going to take any crap from anybody. But back then, some of these older movies, when you see him interview somebody in the box in a interview room, and you take the giant LA, not dictionary, the phone book, and beat the shit out of them because it didn't leave marks.
Right.
Yeah, we don't do that stuff anymore.
Yeah.
Nobody has in 50, 60, 70 years.
Well, I know, but Here's the thing about cop movies is it makes for better copy to suggest that the stuff is still going on and suggest that
Yeah.
it's and embellish it and stuff like that. And I lost the comment, but somebody's listening to us at work. Well, great. That's exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway, so it was a different time. I think we've established that, and LAPD is improving, but this is all really sets up for what's going on in the show and what is actually. I think we need to get to the gangster scene. So go roll right into the gangster scene, Martin, and because I really want to talk to Buzz about this. So they end up encouraging so Buzz is recruited. Bud White is recruited to help deal with the gangsters that are coming to town. And now I've seen this in multiple movies. I saw it in this movie. I think I saw it in Mulholland Falls. I've seen it other movies where it talks about LAPD and how the LAPD dealt with the mobsters who were coming to town. And they basically lumped them up and put them on a plane to get out of here. And that is actually true. That's how the Gangster Squad, big guys like Bud White, using persuasive methods for these guys to get out of town. Can you reinforce that, Buzz? Is that actually?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. My dad, when he was working the Gangster Squad, got about half of the Jewish bookies in Hollywood and in LA were his snitches. And one of the bookies told him, a lot of the bookies hung out in bars, and one of the bookies told him, hey, there's a couple guys from the Detroit Purple Gang who are coming into town or going to the bars in Hollywood and extracting protection money. And my dad told his captain, and the captain put 2 policemen in as many Hollywood bars as they could find. And in the bar, my dad and his partner, who was a guy named Jumbo Kennard, who was like a 6'5" Texan, put them in this bar. And sure enough, these 2 thugs come in and go up to the bartender and said, we're here for the protection money. And the bartender says, protection from what? And he gets backhanded. They reach in the till, pull out $100 and start walking out. They get out the door. My dad got their money and bought them a one-way ticket back to Detroit and told them, there's a scene, I guess, where the captain, Dudley Smith, says, this isn't New Jersey. This is the city of the angels. Well, my dad said they told him, this isn't Detroit. If you come back here again, you're going to go back to Detroit in a pine box. So, yeah, that was pretty authentic. That's what happened. I mean, that's what they did.
Yeah, I like Dudley's. He says, go back to Jersey. This is the city of angels, and you don't have any wings. I thought that was a great. That's a great line. So this is true, and keep in mind this was it was a rough time. I mean, and we hadn't evolved. Law enforcement hadn't evolved yet, right? So this was basically acceptable at the time.
Oh yeah, well, a lot of things were different back then. There weren't any laws about assaulting a police officer back then. I talked to my dad and a guy who was in his unit in the South Pacific in World War II, who later became a vice cop in Harbor Division. And he said, yeah, it was just expected that somebody was going to thump you. So you did what you had to do.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That's amazing. So, yeah, right. You can't expect these guys to hold their punches when, there has to be consequences for beating up cops. And so they're given their street justice because there was no justice is really what I'm hearing. And, but so it is true. And of course, the Gangster Squad evolved into, I think, what do they call it? Organized crime division, organized crime and intelligence division.
Organized crime intelligence division.
Yeah. And the sheriff had a version. I think we call it special investigation, special intelligence unit, something like that. One of those guys worked in the detective unit I was in when I first started detectives, and it faded away because all the people who are now engaging in corruption really didn't want these guys spying on them at the time, right? It was the politicians said, you got to get rid of your intelligence people. Well, why do they want to get rid of them? So they can be corrupt themselves.
Yeah, that was another thing. The press would come out and say, well, LAPD has these files on the politicians and the judges and stuff like that. And that was true. But my dad told me, hey, we didn't go out to target the politicians and make files on them. But he says we'd have, like a mob bordello, and we would take pictures of guys going in and their license plates, and it was judges and politicians and things like that. So they'd open a file on them using that, or bust out crap games, gambling places, and they'd get the pictures and the license numbers and find out that this was a judge or a politician or a DA. And so, yeah, they had those files, but they didn't target those guys originally. They just, as part of their investigation, these guys walked into it.
Right. Yeah. And that's why they don't like automated license plate reader now. They want to be able to be able to do whatever they want. They don't want anybody to be able to follow them. And hey, let's go right into, let's try and get the Night Owl coffee shop scene in Martin before we get our break here. And, this is, so they're actually, so all of Homicide went home by 2:00, as I noticed. So actually gets promoted after doing whatever he did. And he goes to detectives, and he's in Homicide. All the guys have gone home by 2:00, which I thought was interesting. And of course he did too. And then there's a call for a multiple fatality homicide at the Night Owl coffee shop, and he goes there. And what we see in the scene is obviously multiple people have been shot, including, after Bloody Christmas, one of the people fired was Stensland. It was Bud White's partner. He's killed there. One of the girls, and they have something going on in this movie where the girls are made to look like movie stars. If they need some plastic surgery, they do that. But one of the ones who was also killed is the gal who looks like Rita Hayworth. So she's murdered. The coffee shop cook is murdered. I think a waitress is murdered. So multiple people are murdered in this scene, and he rolls up to investigate this crime, and ultimately so does Dudley, right? And this is really launches what's going on. Now, previous to this, we saw some of Mickey Cohen. Mickey Cohen got arrested. We saw some of his lieutenants getting shot up, and we saw the theft of some heroin. So this is the backstory. We also saw some lead-ins to where we saw a pimp, basically, who was pimping out these high-class call girls that look like movie stars as well. And so all this is laid out, and it begins to intersect at the Night Owl Cafe, and with these murders. And this is when our main characters, Bud White and Exley, start focusing on kind of the same thing. They want to know who did this. Bud White because Stensland was killed, and Exley because, and I got to talk about this a little bit, Exley because he's looking about for his career, right? We've seen a lot of people who are focused more on their career than they were law enforcement, right, John? And that's what I get with Exley. He's more focused. How quick can I go, and how fast can I go, and what do I need to do to get there? And I think, ultimately, he's not afraid of going a little bit of gray area to get there. What do you think?
Oh, I totally agree with it. Exley was not well liked when he first went to detectives, because they know how he got it, by diming off Stensland and making a deal with the chief. So he becomes the lieutenant in detectives in Homicide. And they're all like, who the hell is this? They're not going to give him anything. So he wants to go in there, and he starts doing his own thing, trying to protect. And eventually they start listening to him. But yeah, it's all about your career.
Yeah. And he gives kind of yes, we need guys like him that are going to be, who are kind of changing the department, because that kind of comes out in this, where they're trying to professionalize the department. But I think he kind of sees it as an avenue for him to climb. And I wouldn't say
he's a climber.
I wouldn't necessarily say he has the same moral. Bud White has a moral code, right? You can see that with him. He sees things a certain way. Now he's willing to operate old school. That's clear. But he has a certain code that he lives by. Right. And which it kind of makes you a little, you kind of like him more, right? I mean, he's. What do you think, Buzz?
No, I think that's true. He has his standards, and if you violate his standards, he's going to let you know, probably with a fist in the face. And Exley has kind of a moral code, I would say. You know, he's a straight arrow, and he wants professionalism, but he's willing to cross that line to get to his end, but not really jump over it yelling and screaming. He just kind of tiptoes over it. One of the things, if I can digress just a little bit, they have a scene where the two Tonys, it actually happened, the two Tonys get murdered. Tony Brancato and who is the other one? Anthony Trombino. And they call them the two Tonys. They were two thugs from Kansas City who came out here, and they allegedly robbed the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas, which was mob operated, and that's why they were killed. My dad said that they were also going to mob sponsored gambling places and ripping them off. But it was Jimmy the Weasel Fradiano who actually murdered him, and he confessed to that later when he was an FBI informant. Yeah, and my dad hated Fradiano. After these two guys were killed, they heard that he did it, and they took him to the Hollywood station, and he'd had tuberculosis, and he had ping pong balls in his lungs to keep him expanded. And so they went down in the basement. Oh no, the interrogation room's using up here. So they go up to the second floor, running back and forth, and he's breathing real hard. Yeah, my dad said he was just a low-life scumbag coward. And he said he was in the back seat of the car, and he arranged a meeting and got in the back seat and shot them both. So this is what this movie is about. They're linking a lot of true stories into this movie to set the tone. That's what they did, and they took some license on that to enhance the story. But
wow. So it's true, and so I'm really glad. Martin, do we have time for another scene, or we got to go to break?
No, we're not bound to.
Oh, okay.
To ads anymore.
Oh, we're not bound to ads anymore. Okay. Well, I want to do. All right. Let me finish on that one then. So it just expands the idea that this was going on. It was deep. In LA, we had these gangsters coming from all over, and they're fighting each other too, because it's a wide open city. They're taking advantage, because LA was kind of, LA, we had mobsters based in LA who was running the Vegas skim, right? Because Bugsy Siegel was here, right? I think he was partnered with Mickey Cohen at the time. At least they had a relationship, two Jewish gangsters, I believe, and but Las Vegas was wide open for a while. I think they managed to shut that down. And I think the book regarding Fradiano was Last Mafioso, right? So these are all true. A lot of this stuff is true stories. It's based upon it, but it's also, it goes to show, not that I agree with the methods that were used by the Gangster Squad back then. I recognize the context of the time that I did law enforcement is different, that we did law enforcement, but you can understand why the chief at the time, or LAPD at the time, and probably the sheriffs, I imagine they did some of this stuff back in the day, felt compelled to use these extraordinary means to get these gangsters out of town. What do you think, Bud?
Well, I think they used a lot of things that are illegal now. Back then, to place a bug in a house or a business or something, all you needed was a pre-approval of the chief of police, legally. And so they had Mickey Cohen's house bugged. In fact, his house got blown up, and LAPD had a bug in there, and all of a sudden the bug wasn't working. So they're kind of staking out to see when they could go under the house where the bug was. And while they're waiting, the house blows up. Well, what happened was, one of the Italian, I think it was Nick Licata, who was working for the Dragnas at the time, had tried to kill Mickey Cohen 2 or 3 times. And whoever he sent in to put the bomb under Mickey Cohen's house apparently kicked the wire loose from their bug. So so they're waiting to get in there and the house blows up. But and
So I didn't. Go ahead.
they thought they placed it in his bedroom, but he had a bedroom where he had nothing but his 200 custom made suits. That was it wasn't what he used as a bedroom, but they thought they'd blow him up in his bedroom, and they missed the mark.
So they blew up his suits.
Yeah, which probably pissed him off considerably. He was quite the haberdasher. Well, he owned his own tailor shop too. So, yeah.
Well, so that's right. So it was Dragna and then Cohen kind of took Dragna was Italian, right? So that was Italian mafia, right? And then Cohen had his own thing going.
Well, Cohen was actually worked for Siegel for a while, and there was a rumor, I don't know if it's true, but when Siegel got murdered in Brentwood or Beverly Hills, Cohen went to the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel supposedly and put a couple shots through the roof of the bar and wanted to know that he heard that the two guys who murdered, or the guys who murdered Siegel Bugsy were in the hotel, and he says, I want to meet them out in the yard or out in the street in 2 minutes. And then he went out there but he had to leave before the police got there. So you heard the sirens coming.
So why are we using these extraordinary methods to deal with these guys? Is because they're pretty dangerous. I also want to show. I mean, we talk about the gangs that are going on today, or Mexican gangs. It's not like a lot of us, our ethnicities, didn't have our own. We had Irish gangs, we had Italian gangs, you name it. It had Jewish gangs. Yeah. These things happen. So, but we need to deal with them. And so let's go to the next. This is the frame up. So after the murder, the Night Owl murder, Dudley Smith is in charge, actually manages to get on as his second in command in terms of this investigation. Because a previous police officer was killed, they pull out all the stops. And you see them very carefully beginning. You see the conspiracy starting to roll out here. They say that there's three guys that were shooting, three black guys that were shooting shotguns in Griffith Park, and it must be related. I don't know how they get there, but that's what they do. And they're already starting to set up a frame up. They managed to identify the black guys who were doing shootings, and actually, and I think there's a Bud White, or was it actually, I can't remember which he was partnered with, whether it was him or Vincennes. It was Vincennes, and they find these guys, right? But there's already two coppers already there, and there's already shotguns there. And now right there and then I already go, okay, the shotguns are planted, right? I mean, these two guys are there. Now you got the shotguns. And later on, they're determined to match, and they go to take down these three black guys. In reality, they were probably there the two guys that planted the shotguns were there to kill them. And only because Exley and Vincent showed up did these guys survive and end up at the police station for the interview, right? So they started the frame up. They were going to do the frame up and ended right there, but it got complicated because Exley showed up, and now they're doing this scene where they're doing these interviews. And what I really did like about it, because some of the strategies they use here are strategies that we still use today, and that is to, when you have crime partners, is you try and flip them against each other to get them to talk, right?
Right.
And they'll look for the weak one, and they did that here. The guy that peed his pants, one of the guys pees his pants, and they're looking for the weak guy who will talk, and they try to flip them against each other. And they had these little speaker systems there. I'd never seen that before, but I have seen where one investigator will talk to the other one. Well, this is what the other guy's telling us. He's putting it on you. What do you think?
Imagine it still works. Yeah, good effective tools.
Yeah, absolutely. And your goal is to get to the truth here. Of course, these guys are just trying to set them up and get them to make statements against their interest here. Even, and of course, this is against Miranda, and this is before Miranda and all this other stuff. So that stuff didn't even play in here, where these guys are talking without lawyers or any of that kind of stuff.
Right.
And that was the case, right? Back with your grandfathers and
dad,
they didn't have to deal with that stuff. It made it a lot easier to get confessions that accurate?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And they didn't have. I mean, they used the sweat method. They'd have the lights on them real bright, and they'd you know, and like John said, use a phone book or hit them in the knee with a sap. There were, back then there were a lot of beaten confessions. I don't think, I really don't think my dad or my grandfather ever beat a confession out of anybody, and they never prosecuted anybody. They never went to court. Their job was to gather intelligence. Now I know out in the street they got in a few fights with thugs, gangsters, and other thugs that they saw just as they were driving by committing crimes. But they would do some interrogate. Well, like I said, with Fradiano running him up and down the stairs when he couldn't breathe, they did that kind of stuff all the time. So yeah.
Yeah, so other methods of coercion that don't involve force. I mean, all I know is when I dealt with informants, you got a lot farther with a little bit of sugar than you did anything else. And you wanted good information that kept coming in, so you wanted to maintain good relationships with those that are giving you information.
Yeah.
So if you're working intelligence, that's how it works, right?
Yeah.
You might get
snitches are your bread and butter.
Yeah, absolutely. Snitches are your bread and butter. So if you're beating them, you don't get very far with that. So anyways, these guys start flipping on stuff that they actually were doing. They actually were involved in the rape of a female, and they start talking about that. And of course, Bud White, his overprotective self, he's got to go deal with it. And they get information, and they go end up saving a gal, and Bud White ends up killing the suspect in a stage shooting. And I obviously they wanted to blame these guys. These are the guys who did the Night Owl shoot. They didn't want any more witnesses that can talk. They just want to say these guys did it together. And look, they also viciously raped this gal. But it was interesting when they Dudley was just trying to shut down this investigation, right? And it's clearly you're figuring out that the cops are involved, obviously, clearly. And you haven't quite got, well, what's the end goal here? I haven't quite linked the heroine myself at this point in the movie.
Yeah.
But they want to shut this investigation down. It's got too many tentacles, and it's a threat to them, right? And that's what they're trying to do, and they're trying to blame it on these black kids who don't appear to be saints if they're involved in raping this gal, right?
Yeah.
So that's what they're trying to do. So, but these guys, and after they do this, these guys somehow escape. They never really laid out how these guys escape, but somehow they managed to escape. And actually, he remembers in the interview that they have a dealer, right? There's a dealer in LA. They know where he's at, and they think that's where he's probably at. And he goes there. He grabs Vincennes, he grabs one of these other guys because Vincennes and Bud White weren't there. He grabs one of the other guys in the squad to go take these guys down. And when they get in there, there ends up being a shootout, and they end up, I think they killed all of them, right? And he gets nicknamed Shotgun Ed. Well, for a couple of things I had here, and this is more of a tactical thing. I liked using the shotgun myself whenever I was doing a high-risk traffic stop. I said, you know what? I'm a decent shot, but I'd rather use the shotgun because then I'm a much better shot with a shotgun, right? Right. I'm going to hit something, right?
Coming at them rather than one, right?
Right. So even when I was working by myself, if I could get the shotgun out, I would get the shotgun out, and I used the shotgun. And it reminded me of the shotguns that we carried, the Ithacas as well. John, you saw the scene. Were you a shotgun aficionado? I was, although I didn't usually take them into buildings, which is what they did.
Yeah, not me.
Oh, you like your handgun?
Yeah. I like to have my other hand free.
Yeah.
Yeah, I if I was dealing with an armed suspect, I wanted a shotgun if I knew I was going to go up against them. And but the fact that he gets in the shooting, of course, now he's a hero because he's killed all these guys. But also, it kind of closed off all the leads, right? These guys, they're dead. These guys are the mass murderers. They are the killers of the Night Owl.
They're the case.
They're the case, right? They cleared the case. and now they can move on with what's going on. And but these guys, they just don't think it's not right. These Exley and Bud White and Vincennes, they just think there's something wrong here. There's something going on here that's wrong. But I did like this scene. There's a lot of action. He comes out as a hero, Shotgun Ed Exley, right?
Yeah.
And that's not unusual to get nicknames after these kinds of things. What do you think of the scene, John? Did you like the action scene?
Yeah, I mean, you don't. Nowadays, you need a search warrant, but or a Ramey warrant, but they kick in the door and everything. It's played up, but I didn't like doing it inside a room like that because it hampers movement in a tight spaces. But no, it was a great scene. A great scene.
Yeah, it's
and these guys went for their guns, so
yeah, they did. No, it was. I mean, they did go for their John. I was it the three kids, black kids, and then the dealer. I think is the four people that were in this scene that ended up getting killed. But they have a problem with it. They don't believe that these guys are truly the shooters at the Night Owl shooting, and so they decide they're going to investigate further. But something else comes up, and this is they're talking about building a freeway in LA, right? And we had seen earlier in the movie where this guy was being entertained by Kim Basinger, and Bud White comes up, and then he intimidates the guy to leave, right? They're playing some Humphrey Bogart scene or whatever they were playing. They were role playing, I guess. And he ends up being a councilman. And he's going to the council chambers to make a vote regarding the building of a freeway that he'd been opposed to. And they bribed him. They gave him pictures of him of himself with Kim Basinger.
And he changed his vote.
And he changed his vote. And so this is obviously this is the corruption that's going on in the city, and it begins to broaden that this is about widespread corruption in the city and getting votes, which is here we are today. Current Price, his girlfriend or now his new wife is getting money from a developer for building, right? I mean, so it's that Jose Huizar, $1 million to build a high rise in the city of LA. So it's developers trying to get influence to get what they want built in the city to make money, and the councilmen taking advantage of that to make money here. But also, if they can't get the councilman to do it, they bribe him with prostitution. So, Bud, you talked about it. These politicians going to prostitution places or places that they shouldn't be at, and there's a reason why the Hat Squad or the Gangster Squad should be looking at these guys, because it indicates that they're likely to be corrupted if they're in that life, or if they're using prostitution, if they're hanging out with these guys that are involved in vice. And it means they're susceptible. Which is why law enforcement should have been looking at them at the time. And this demonstrates that, right? And Bud White knew he was a councilman. He said, "Yeah, have a nice day, council. Go home to your wife, councilman." Whatever he said to him.
Yep.
But that's part of the corruption that was going on, and that was widespread back in the 40s and 50s, right, Bud? Buzz?
Oh yeah. In fact, some of the stuff that the city that was going on in the city is actually reflected in the movie. There was one scene where they talk about this guy who killed people and cut their body parts up and put them in the incinerator. Well, back in the late 40s, early 50s, all the new houses had incinerators in their backyard to burn trash. And finally, when the smog got so bad, they outlawed them. But that actually happened. That lends to the authenticity, I think, of the movie. We
had one in the back of our house when I was growing up.
Really?
Yeah, mine too.
San Fernando Valley.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was in Westminster by the LA airport, and we had our backyard, and in the end at the back of the backyard was an incinerator, and every other house in our neighborhood had one too. But but yeah, and the corruption was going on. A lot of it involved the building trades, in addition to trying to get into Hollywood, and the card clubs in Gardena, which was the only legal gambling in California, were in the card clubs in Gardena, and the mob was trying to take over them, the Rainbow Room, the Gardena Club, all those. So I'm sure in Gardena there was a lot of graft going on with the city officials.
We still see it with these city officials, and I think what Bell had the city manager who was ripping everything off. I mean, I think he had corrupted even the police chief. The police chief, he slid out of that, but he went to federal prison too, where they were just milking the city for high salaries and pensionable salaries, unbelievably, and the city councils were just rubber stamping whatever decisions they made, right? And I mean, he finally got caught. So in this case, though, they're extorting the city councilman to build freeways. Obviously, whenever there's a lot of growth, there's a lot of opportunities for corruption, and that's built in here. But it also really goes to show that this guy Pierce Paget, the guy that's running these prostitutes, he's into this more than just to make a buck on prostitution. He's in it for influence. So you're starting to see these things intersect, right? You're starting to see these criminal enterprises are related, and this is, I think, where the scene where Dudley has some more folks in the Viceroy Motel, some broken down motel. He's encouraging him to go back to, and this is
Victory Motel.
Yeah, the Victory Motel, and he makes the famous comment, "Go back to Jersey. This is the city of angels, and you don't have any wings." I just thought, and they have a lot of little comments like that through this, but this was probably the best one that I really liked. And one of the things I wanted to bring up, and John will probably know this, is when you have these vice related type businesses, some legitimate, some kind of not so legitimate, law enforcement ends up dealing with them. And like we had the body shop. You remember the body shop, John?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And there was when I first started working with Todd, there was a deputy who met one of the dancers, and they ended up getting married, right? So vice and law enforcement, they're the ones out on the street all the time, right? They're intersecting, and Bud White ends up sleeping with Kim Basinger, and I thought of that story, right? Is the body shop and this deputy. There is still attraction. There's physical attraction between them. You can tell that there's a great deal of physical attraction, and Bud White wants to protect Kim Basinger, and I think she likes that because she sees it as genuinely somebody who actually cares about her, not just about her looks. So, but when you're working in Hollywood, or you're working where there's a lot of vice, you end up interacting with a lot of these people who are on the fringes of society, who may sometimes want to work their way out, and you end up having friendships to some degree on the streets, and sometimes they have relationships, right? Sometimes they have relationships, right, John? I mean, we saw that, right, John? That happens.
Oh yeah. We had a sergeant that worked West Hollywood that would frequent the Asian massage places, and end up being their warning. He'd call them and say, "Yeah, they're going to raid you," but he got taken care of.
They found him out. I remember that. Yeah. What do you think, Buzz? That does happen when you're working the streets.
Oh yeah, it happens. When I was working patrol, we had a patrol lieutenant who had a relationship with a madam. There was a whorehouse or bordello in Signal Hill, which is in the middle, completely surrounded by lawns. And the madam was his girlfriend. And, they knew it, they never did anything. That lieutenant retired as a lieutenant and later went up and was teaching at that law enforcement school up in San Luis. And not only that, I mean, we had an assistant chief who when he was a lieutenant out at the academy, our vice squad gets a call from LAPD intelligence from the LA airport. They say, "Hey, we got a."
Oh, you lost Buzz.
Yeah,
All right,
his
well,
connection was failing.
yeah, you can send him a text to get back on. Anyway,
He's getting in again.
he's getting back on. So these things happen. You know, when you're dealing with vice, you're going to get splashed with, and that's what I saw with Bud, right? And let's go right into setting up the DA because this is the they. You there, Buzz?
In lieutenant's pocket. Went back, called LAPD and told them, and went and told the chief of police. The chief of police called the lieutenant in. The lieutenant said, "Oh, I didn't know he was a hoodlum. I bought some raw diamonds from him as an investment," and pulled them out and showed them to the chief. Nothing ever happened to him. He later became assistant chief under Larry Binkley, who LAPD gratuitously gave to us as a chief. Uh-oh.
So it does happen. I mean, you're in the streets, you're going to meet people.
I'm not
and
seeing
you're
anything now.
All right, you want to just go ahead and
Did
tell
you
us
get all
about
that?
Martin? Go. I did. I got most of it. So
You. So
He's freezing
there's
up.
still, especially where Vice is concerned. Huh?
yes.
What did you say, John?
You just keep
Can you
freezing.
hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you guys froze too. I don't know.
I think your
Anyhow, I
connection's
can
bad.
see
might
you
wanna
and hear you
log
Yeah.
out.
now.
Okay.
It's probably Cox Cable.
Probably cable.
Well, it's
All right. Well, let's move on to setting up the DA. So the DA, you know, so they, you know, so whoever they want to set up the DA, you figure out law enforcement's involved in the corruption, right? Obviously, Pierce Patch is involved, and they decided to set up the DA, and they use Danny DeVito. He brings in an actor who is, I guess, gay or bisexual, a male guy. And they know that DA apparently partakes in sleeping with young men, and they make sure he gets introduced, and it ends up leading to this actor. This guy wants to be famous or wants to be a movie star to his death, right? So they set him up, and I think, given with what we saw with Weinstein, not that I saw that he did any murders, but he's not above setting. Hollywood is not above setting people up to get their way with them, right?
Absolutely.
To get them dirty so that they can influence them, and that is the dark side of Hollywood. It does happen. It was definitely happening at the time. He kind of uses Vincennes here to talk the guy into doing it. Danny DeVito does. And so they set up the DA, right? And the goal was for, unbeknownst to, I think, Danny DeVito, the goal was he was supposed to sleep with the DA, and then Vincennes was supposed to show up and catch him in the act, and then they would have their influence that way. But Vincennes shows up and he finds the guy dead, right? So he's been murdered, right? And obviously that is, I think, to cut off the loose ends. So once they've already got the DA sleeping with somebody, now they've cut the loose end by killing the I guess a male prostitute is what I would call it here. And this has an impact on Vincennes. This is really what's driving him he wants to now find out who did this. And he also indicates that this guy might have been working with Pierce Patchett as a male prostitute as well. Did I kind of get that scene right, John? Do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, what Vincennes was upset because he kind of pushed the kid towards the DA, just camaraderie thing, go get, meet the DA, because he knew the guy was gay. But then afterwards, when he finds him dead, he's like, well, wait a minute. He didn't want, it hurt him. He knows he didn't want this kid to get killed. He thought it was just nothing, just get a little money on the X side and get some hush-hush that magazine, get another shot in there to keep his career going with Hollywood. He didn't bargain for that. So that's after that he wanted to know what the hell.
Well, he was even struggling with the fact that, apparently he's starting to have second thoughts about the morality of setting these young actors up just for a photo shoot, because it does destroy their life. And this kid apparently had been already set up, busted by Vincennes for some narcotics. Now he's going to be busted, involved in vice, and his life will be completely over, meaning, or at least his ambitions to be an actor will be completely over. And he's struggling. He goes to the bar, he has a few drinks, right? And he's got that 50 in his hand, which is what he's supposed to get paid before he goes to the hotel and finds it. So he's struggling with the morality.
Right.
Is this what I really signed up for, to be a policeman? And he's realizing, I should do something like a policeman does. It isn't all just about Hollywood and flash. We got to do something right, and we got to deal with the dark side of Hollywood as well, right? Is that what you saw, Buzz?
Yeah, and you can see that Vincent, or whatever his name was conflicted, and had guilt because this young guy was killed, basically that he set up, and he didn't know that. But there's you can, even somebody like Vincent, who was obviously a narcissist, was on the show Badge of Honor, which was obviously a
Dragnet,
a fictionalization of Dragnet. And so you get to see, the movie shows that he does have a conscience, and he wants to straighten things out in his world, so he can I guess live with himself. But he's a narcissist, so he wants to continue with his shows and his life, but he doesn't want to put other people in danger, I guess, is what I got out of it.
Yeah, he doesn't like crossing that line.
Yeah, and during their investigation, these guys are figuring out that there's a relationship. They end up looking. They figure out that Buzz, Buzz Meeks in the show, he was somebody that was a bodyguard for Pierce Patchen early on, and then Stensland had been partners, and also that they had worked for Dudley Smith. So I think Buzz White figures that out, and so actually is following his lead. He figures that out as well, and Vincennes quite hadn't figured out the connection, but he has information, and he decides to go run it by Dudley. And I guess this is a scene. It's not the Black Kids. This is, I think, what I named this scene. And this is the point where I think Rollo Tomasi comes in, which I think is really a very unique, it's very interesting way he did that. So Huxley had told him a story about why he became a cop. He told Vincennes a story about his dad getting killed, and that he wanted, and they never found the guy, and he gave the guy who killed his dad a name, Rollo Tomasi, and he's going to keep looking for him, and that's why he joined the police department. And he tells his story to Vincennes, right?
Yeah.
And Vincennes, who's struggling with trying to put all these pieces together, he knows about Pierce Paget. He thinks that there's more going on. He thinks that Dudley is trustworthy, and he ends up, he ends up at his house, and so this is the scene where he gets told the story about Rollo Tomasi by Huxley, right? And I didn't realize, you don't realize the impact of that scene until much later when Vincennes is killed, and he mentions that name. But he also struggling with these are the bad guys, but also he ends up in the Formosa Cafe, and this is where I think they brace Johnny Stompanato in this scene,
right? And
Johnny Stompanato was. It's interesting how they weaved in true life into this story. He was the boyfriend of Lana Turner. Right?
Yeah.
And Lana Turner's daughter ended up killing Johnny Stompanato, and later on. So the fact that they weave this in and they weave the Formosa Cafe in, which was existed around back then, was also pretty interesting. And they also they start turning over the rocks from Johnny. They're getting information that there's heroin involved, that there was a heroin theft, and then he's starting to put all this stuff together. They're starting to put all this stuff together at the Formosa Cafe. So, John, do you know the Johnny Stompanato story? Do you remember that one? And
Yeah, he was killed by Lana Turner's daughter when he was beating Lana Turner. However, the big rumor was at that time that Louis B. Mayer got with the chief, and they ended up putting it on the daughter. When in reality,
it was Lana
Turner's the one who killed him because she was being beaten. It was a righteous killing. You know, it happened in 1958 when he died, and he was a thug that liked to beat women, and he got his comeuppance.
So that was the backstory. Did your father or grandfather have anything to add to that, Buzz? I didn't know that.
Oh no, John got it exactly right. Supposedly Lana Turner, Johnny Stompanato was beating her, and she stabbed him, I think, and killed him. And then they put it on his daughter because she was a juvenile, and so she, she didn't have to do any jail time or anything like that. So yeah, no, that's exactly right. And Johnny Stompanato was like Mickey Cohen's bodyguard at the time.
So he was just hired muscle then at that time as well, right? So
he was a big, good-looking guy and attracted a lot of women. So a lot like John.
A lot like John, yeah. Well, but they start figuring out there's something going on with heroin here as well, and as they're tracking down these leads, and Bud White and Exley are getting close to figuring out what's going on. Vincennes is also doing his investigation, but Vincennes makes the mistake of going to Dudley's house, right? So Martin, just roll right into the Dudley scene when it comes up, and what I really liked about this scene is his wherewithal to talk about Rollo Tomasi.
Yeah,
because he knows that Dudley Smith is, and obviously as soon as he gets shot, he knows what's going on. It's Dudley Smith behind this. He's using these cops to set up these black guys. He was the one that was responsible for the murders of the Night Owl. He's now, as soon as Dudley turns around and shoots him, he now gets it all, right? And as he's dying, he says Rollo Tomasi, which of course Dudley Smith doesn't know what that means, right? He doesn't know what that means. He thinks he's somebody connected to the investigation that can unravel what's going on.
Right.
And he tries to research that name, and that it comes out later. But he's talking about Pierce Paget. Vincennes is here. He's talking about what he's finding out, and he realizes, Dudley realizes the gig is up. It's going to lead to him. He worked with Buzz. He worked with Stensland. It's going to lead to him. He knows that, and he ends up killing Vincennes. And I don't know. I thought this was a great scene, and I did. Out of all the movies that I've seen, this guy in, I forget the actor's name now, but Kevin Spacey in. I really liked his character in this one, and he did get high marks for this one. What'd you think of this whole scene, John?
Oh, it was great. Funny thing about that scene, just a little off subject for a second. When they filmed this and he gets shot and he dies, they had to do it 3 times because he kept, whenever the actor playing Dudley moved, his eyes moved. So he couldn't play dead. So they had to put a dot on the wall, and he had to stare at that dot while he was dead, so he wouldn't move his eyes for the scene. But no, it was a righteous scene. And then apparently afterwards, Dudley, you don't see it, but he calls his cronies, and they take and dump the body in Griffith Park, and that's the excuse of where he found it. But once he he mentions Rollo Tomasi, that's when Exley knows what
Yeah.
the hell.
Yeah, and that's and just the wherewithal, and it was I liked it. I thought it was a great scene. What did you think of Kevin Spacey in the movie Buzz? And what did you think of the scene?
Well, I thought he did a great job acting, and he that scene was cinematically it was absolutely fantastic. I mean, you can see the surprise on Spacey's face when he gets shot. And you can see he realizes what's happening now, who the bad guy is and everything, and he puts it all together. He knows he's dying, and when he dies, the viewers, the people who are watching the film, start to realize, boy, this Dudley is really as bad as you thought he was before. He's worse now. I mean, he is he's the brains behind the deal, and ultimately you find out that he's trying to take over the mob, all the mob businesses in LA, trying to keep everybody else out and himself in. So,
Well, which
great.
is unreal. It's unrealistic. I mean, they intersect. Or they dovetail the extraordinary methods used by the LAPD to keep the mobsters out, which was definitely not consistent with the Constitution. But it was.
Yeah.
It's like, do the ends justify the means? That comes up a lot on my show. So I mean, do the
Yeah.
ends justify the means, given what the guy was, what was going on at the time, and using these extraordinary methods to get the gangsters to leave town? Did the ends justify the means, right? But then they take that, which is already morally ambiguous, and they say, well,
Yeah.
they're really just doing it just to take over the rackets in LA. So they can completely dispel any morality related to what their real goals are, and which is why they set up the DA, right? They set up the DA so that they can get him to play ball, and it's ultimately they end up in the DA's house, Bud White and Exley are in his office,
Yeah.
because they realize, hey, this kid is dead. The kid that you slept with is dead, and I really liked. There's another a comment that they make in the scene, and I didn't really list this as a scene, but I really did want to talk about this. Is so they got the DA, and he's refusing to play ball. You got any evidence? Well, you can't prove anything. And of course,
Yeah.
Bud White, actually says, okay, this is where actually crosses the line, right? He goes, well, I want to play this right, but I'm going to need a little coercive action by Mr. Bud White, and he starts pushing the DA's head. But what the DA said, a dead male prostitute, there's one that gets off there's dozens that get off the bus every day. Do you remember him saying that in the scene, right?
Yeah.
Really callous and cold.
Yeah.
And then Bud White starts pushing his head in the toilet, and oh, don't worry about it if you drown. I forget exactly how he said it. There's lawyers getting off the buses every day in LA.
Yeah, to replace you.
I really like that. So don't worry about it. There's, and so he's, Bud is clearly he's not just protective of women. He's protective of vulnerable people. That's why he obviously went into law enforcement, and this callous behavior of this DA who was set up, right? He was set up. So he's just trying to protect himself, and he spills the bean. He lays out that Dudley is the one involved. Dudley wants them to play ball. Dudley was just trying to retrieve some stolen heroin that had been ripped off from Cohen, and that the prostitutes were just part of the graft that was going on, the grift that was going on, and that Patchett might have the avenues to sell the heroin as well. So, he spills the beans about what is going on in the city, and now actually. And Bud White are a liability now, right? So they're. Do you remember that scene at all, John? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. It was
like
great.
that comment. I thought that was another one of those lines that I thought, oh, that was awesome line. There's a lawyer getting off the bus every day. We just,
right. I like the also where He said, "What are you trying to play good cop, bad cop?" And he's cutting his nose hairs. He goes, "I invented it." And next thing you know, his face is in the glass.
Yeah.
And that's the end of the story.
Yeah,
That's
and then
their business.
and actually says, "So is this how they played good cop, bad cop?" And
Yeah, where you're from.
remember
Yeah.
that? Another great
Yeah.
line. I go, God,
Yeah.
these another great line by
That's a
these
great
guys.
movie.
Yeah. So
Well-
and I this is why I like some of the other movies. I think Prince of the City had a lot of good lines, and obviously this one has a lot of good quips. That Dirty Harry, obviously he has a ton of good lines. I think next week I'm
Yeah.
going to try and do Dirty Harry Magnum Force with a couple of guys. So we'll get I think the one they say in there is, man's got to know his limitations. I think that's Magnum Force.
Oh yeah, Magnum Force.
Yeah.
So what'd you think
Yeah.
of that scene, Buzz? You know, they
I think it's one of the best scenes of any movie I've ever seen that shows poetic justice. You know,
yeah.
just this guy is you know, hey, it's okay. You know, this was just a low life, you know, joy boy, and you know, they get off the bus. Well, you know, he finally is hanging out the window and telling them, you know, going to tell them everything. And now it's, you know, it's his life on the line. So now it's important, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I really like the scene.
Yeah. So, and you know, and they all did a great job. Even the actor that played the DA, I mean, he did a fantastic job as well. But now that obviously the DA, they leave his office, and he's of course calling people to tell him what's going on, right? Because when this blows wide open, it's going to blow wide open for all of them, right? And so they, of course, set up Bud White and Ed Exley, Lieutenant Ed Exley, and they encourage them to go to the Victory Motel. Both get different, and they're told to meet each other there. And it's obviously it's orchestrated by Captain Douglas Smith. And I really enjoyed the shootout scene. I thought it was a fantastic shootout. I mean, we're using old technology weapons, shotguns, handguns. I think they had an automatic there.
38 snub nose.
That Victory Motel. Yeah. And I thought it was a great shooting. So, you know, and also they get hit, right? And they keep shooting. They keep fighting, which is also pretty realistic. You know, we had a Carson lobby shooting guy came in and shot our deputy, and we had a gunfight in the lobby when I was a brand new watch commander. This was over at Carson Station, and they tendering this guy. That one of the deputies tendering this guy, and he was still. But I got out of my office to go and try and take him down. He was still up for a fight. He had already taken the fatal round, took out his descending order, and he was still pointing his gun, looking for a target, right? And so you can be hit and stay in the fight, and they show that.
Oh yeah.
And again, and I have to go back to these are the guys who were. A lot of these guys went through World War II and Korea. These are tough guys. They probably saw some of their friends die in these wars, and they know that you can still keep fighting even as the gunfight goes on. But here they're fighting other cops and probably some mobsters that are part of Dudley's crew. What do you think of the shooting scene, John? Did you like the shooting scene?
Oh, I loved it. You know, Buzz also had his 45, probably a Browning that he had when he was in the service, in the military. And that 45 will knock you down and take you out. But it was great. It was well done. The smart move going underneath, you know, the floorboards. No, the whole thing was great when he comes up and he takes one out. But then, you know, at the end when he gets shot several times, it's very realistic, very real live. And just a side note, the Victory Hotel is a real hotel. There were two of them in LA, one in Signal Hill and one in Chavez Ravine, where Dodger Stadium is.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. This was probably, I wonder if it was Signal Hill, which would, Signal Hill's over, that's that little city over near Long Beach, right? Is that?
Yeah, it's completely, Long Beach completely surrounds it. Yep. It's a big oil city is how it started.
Oh, and that's what the terrain looks like, is there's oil rigs behind it. And, you know, it's.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Not anymore, but because the governor or they passed a new legislation where you can't drill or pump oil out of anything in California near a house or anything like that. But California was the original oil boom, and it still had a lot of production going on. And so that was part of the growth of California and Los Angeles too. It was the original oil boom for the United States, or one of the original ones, was in the great state of California. What did you think of the shooting scene, Buzz? Did you like this whole shooting scene?
Well, like you said, it's realistic. You can get hit 2, 3, 4 times and still carry on. One of our commanders wrote an article that was published in one of the California state law enforcement magazines, and he did a study. I think it was called the Hollywood effect, and it was all these people when the majority of law enforcement agencies in Southern California went to the automatic weapons, and the press and the bleeding hearts would say, well, how come this guy was shot 27 times? Well, he said, we're taught to shoot till the threat is over. And he just proved, in fact, he said you could get fatally shot through the heart and you can still run and shoot and do whatever you have for 20 to 25 seconds after you've received a fatal shot. So it's really I want a lot of down.
All right, Robo Buzz is back, I think, and so Buzz, you're freezing up again.
Well, like I said, it's just okay. How about now? I see you guys and I can hear you.
Yeah, you keep freezing, and
well, let me see.
It's the cable company.
That's okay. So anyway, so you enjoyed the scene as well, and I think most people need to realize when you're up for a fight and your adrenaline's pumping, you can keep going after you get hit, but it is also a mindset, and a lot of these guys coming out of
World
War II in Korea, it's a mindset. You keep going, you keep fighting. And unfortunately, I think, and Buzz talks about it, the Hollywood effect. People think once they get hit, they should be down. No, you're in that gunfight forever. You got. There was a great a lecture that it was videotaped. I don't know, John, if you saw it, Lieutenant McAndrews in the academy. He gave it. Never give up, never surrender, always fight, fight to the end, and that's the mindset that has to be put in so that you can survive these shootouts. I like the shootout because they're using a shotgun. I think a shotgun is a very good tool when you're fighting for your life. All you have to do is point and shoot, and you get that double-aught buck or number 4 coming out, and you're gonna hit your target. Bud used it very effectively. Took these guys out. And in the end, I really like the final part of the scene was. Is Buzz Dudley shoots Buzz, right? Bud, and Bud finally goes down after taking a few rounds, and he sees Exley, and he's out. Bud does stab him in the leg, just before he tries to shoot Exley. But he's out, and the sirens are coming, and I think it's really Dudley thinks he's going to be able to manipulate this again, like he's manipulated everything, right? He says, "Well, just make sure you show them your badge when they come up so they don't shoot them." And this is where, at the end of the scene, his friend, now his friend, although he slept with his girlfriend and got beat up by Bud, now Bud is his friend, right? And he shot his friend, and he's the sinister guy. Exley's figured it out. And the question is, he's as Dudley is walking towards the lights and siren that are coming over the hill with his badge up. No, have you been there in that situation before where you were in plain clothes and you had to hold your badge up? Yes, I have been too. So I kind of identified with that. Hold your badge up, make sure they know you're a cop, and actually makes the decision. All right. I'm going to cross that. I'm not only going to tiptoe over that line, like you said, Buzz, I'm going to jump over this line and I'm going to take this guy out. Right. and maybe he wants to be the next captain. Who knows? But he decides but Dudley is Rollo Tomasi. He's the guy that gets away with it. He's not going to get away with it. He's the guy that killed his dad who got away with it. He's the guy that, killed Vincennes, and he's going to try and get away with it. He's not going to get away with it on Exley's watch. He's not going to get away with it. And he ends up killing Dudley Smith. And which I think is, obviously this is all fictional, but I actually like the outcome. It ends Dudley's reign of terror, which was what was going on. What'd you think of John?
Oh, I agree. Number one, he went on the department because he wanted to be like his dad, who was murdered on the department. Well, frankly, his dad worked for Dudley, and you don't know. There's an undertone of maybe that's who Rollo Tomasi in real life was, but he knows he killed Vincennes. He saw him shoot his buddy Bud, and now he's going to try and eke out of it again. And he said, "No, I'm done." And frankly, I think he's thinking, "You're the guy that did my dad," and he took him out.
At least symbolically.
Yeah, because he didn't know, and he was shot on duty, and there was no evidence to anything of how it happened. Right. So their excuse was it was some drive-by or some gangbanger robbed a store and shot him, and nobody saw anything. But he did work for Dudley back in the day. So.
Right, and and then the of course, then the follow-up scene is, how do we clean up the department? How do we sweep it under the rug? And I don't know, Buzz. I have to believe that at the time there was stuff that they did publicly, and then stuff they did quietly behind the scenes. You have the history. What do you think?
No, I think that hits a nail on the head, and that still happens today. There's everybody talks about transparency. But if you can hide something that makes your department look bad, they will try and make sure it doesn't get out in the public. Now, I saw the last scene a little bit different than John. I saw Exley as, it looks like he wants justice, and the only way he can get justice and start cleaning up the department is to get rid of the main corrupt force, which is Dudley Smith.
Oh, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, he's the
for all the reasons John said, but
And then when he's what are we going to do? But when he's in the interview room and he knows exactly what they're talking about, he says, "Well, you're going to need more than one hero, right?" So as the department talks about how they move forward with this, they decide to make Dudley Smith a hero, killed in a shootout, taking down corrupt people. And of course, Exley becomes a hero as well, and so this is the path to cleaning up the LAPD. Sometimes using extrajudicial means to do it, but ultimately, LAPD became a very a lot of honest cops on the LAPD trying to do a good job under difficult circumstances. In my argument, working for corrupt politicians, as we see today going on, it's amazing. We got to hold the cops accountable, but hey, don't look at what I'm doing, So, I mean, when you got 4 of 15 council districts corrupted, and yet they're the ones. And then you look at we had a couple of cases on the board of supervisors for the sheriff's department where it looks like there was at least one that there was corruption that kind of
Mark Ridley Thomas.
Well, Mark Ridley Thomas, but then also Supervisor Kuehl. I think that was a sweetheart deal on a contract, and she put her friend on the oversight board. So so cops have to walk on water, but politicians can swim in the mud, the cesspool, and that's okay. And that's a problem for me. And that's I like the direction that the LAPD goes after they clean up. I think they're a fine organization. I worked with a lot of great LAPD officers, and it's a tough city to work in, no matter what. But also, right now, we have so many liberal politicians who are also corrupt. It's what can I get for myself versus what can I do for my constituents? And that's a real problem for me. But he says there needs to be heroes. And now one of the positive ends of the story is Kim Basinger and and Bud White, Russell Crowe. He ends up leaving LA. He's going back there, I think Arizona, to be with her, and they decide to leave that lifestyle behind. So and of course the fact that he's still alive is amazing. He's been shot a few times, but he's heading out of town with her, and they're leaving all of this stuff behind, the cesspool behind, because they want to just have a regular wholesome life, right? So I did like that scene. What'd you think, John?
Right. Oh, I loved it. And, he's still in the back of the car. They had his bag of nutrients from the hospital.
Yeah.
He still had his IV in him.
Yeah.
He just wanted to get out, and that was it. But, there's countless stories of people being shot multiple times. His last one went through his cheek and out the other one. You look at, I remember when we were deputies, there was a cop down in Torrance, got shot in the face, and he was putting it out as he's shooting back. Nobody could understand him because it blew up all his teeth in his mouth. But he came up and he shot.
All right. Well, I got to wrap up here, but I wanted to, first of all, Buzz, thank you for coming on. We'll have to work out your technical stuff because you have such great insight as to what was going on. I know we talked about doing the Black Dahlia. I think one other movie that you mentioned. I want to do Mulholland Falls with you, and I'll be in touch to do those. And I do appreciate you coming on. Stick around afterwards. We do a quick debrief. Go ahead, John.
Okay.
I just want to drop a couple things. Number one of the assistant chiefs in the movie was Daryl Gates. Also, if you don't know, Buzz is taking all his dad's memorabilia and donate it to the Mob Museum in Las Vegas.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right.
So if you get a chance, go to the Mob Museum.
Go to the Mob Museum, and but thanks for coming on my podcast. I will definitely have you on in the future so we can get a lot more insight with the Gangster Squads. Particularly, I do want to do the movie Gangster Squad with Josh Brolin. So we'll eventually do that one as well because that would be right up your alley. Martin, I think that's it for the show. Do you have anything to add?
Oh no, I'm well. I'm well.
All right. Well, okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show. You can catch us on Pop Culture Minefield every Tuesday at 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time on YouTube. We also have a Pop Culture Minefield on Rumble, same time, 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time every Tuesday. And you can go back on both of those platforms and watch my previous shows.
Good.
Thank you, and have a great morning.
Thanks, guys.
You too. Okay. Bye-bye.
Those sons of bitches.
Ma, I'm doing a show.